chapter. We're going to start out unexpectedly with a little math lesson, and so I'll start doing that. This is not going to project great, so this isn't anything you need to write down or worry about, but I will write, I'm going to write two numbers on here first to start. And the other number is this. So that number is 8,849. That number is 16.5. Any idea of what relationship that might have to do with what we're here to talk about tonight? What they might mean? What you might guess? Somebody shout out. What do you think the first one is? That is. This is the number of applications at Middlebury College this year. 8,849. Okay. Anybody guess what 16.5 is?
Possibility.
Actually, it is. But that's not what that means. I'm not here to talk about that necessarily or selectivity. 16.5. Any other guesses?
Number of essays you actually read.
The wise guy. Write his name down for me. Yeah. Good guess. I didn't read that many. Other. 16.5 FTE, full-time equivalent. That is the number of people in the Middlebury College admissions office this year whose full-time dedicated job was reading those 8,849 applications. That's 13 people, technically 12.5 full-time, 4 staff readers who we hire seasonally who are very experienced former admissions people. Those 16.5 people read every single one of those 8,849 applications. What would you deduce from that?
Get it right well.
I don't think you get bored. That's fair, but
Memory.
what does it mean? It means we have a heck of a lot of applications to read, and we move through them very quickly. And I don't care whether you're talking about Harvards and Yales with 30,000 plus, or you're talking, Mr. Giffen, where I used to work at some point at Kenyon, maybe 5,000 or 6,000. Roughly speaking, most places are going to have average ratios about that. The first reader load, okay, the number of first applications that everybody in the admissions office at Middlebury had to read this year was about 600. Half-time would do just over 300. As dean, I do a quarter load of about 150 or so. But I do a lot of second reads, and then everybody gets a second look, and on average it'll be 300 to 400 full second reads as well. And so that, as you indicated, means that we are moving through in an average day. We budgeted about 22 to 25 days for first reads in January and February. That's an 8-hour day, even though we all work longer than that. So on average, no matter what school you're talking about, it's typically going to need to be at least probably 4 and maybe 5 an hour. This is probably 12 to 15 minutes, and that is for probably 25 to 30 pieces of paper. Your common application, your essay, your transcript, your letters of recommendation, all suggest what? We're moving through these fairly quickly, and one of the things I want to get to as we talk about the essay is its purpose. None of this means we aren't taking it seriously, we aren't reading them carefully, because we're very experienced at it. We have a lot of people, and like anything, the Malcolm Gladwell theory some of you read about, you do something 10,000 times or more, you get pretty good at it. And among all of us, we read probably over a course of a lifetime tens of thousands of applications. I was an English teacher at one point where I taught at boarding school. I really value the essay. I think that it can be distinctive. Later I'm going to share with you, and not hand it out right away, but I'm going to share with you 4 essays from this year of students who were admitted to Middlebury. I don't know if all 4 were necessarily coming. They received an attribute called ESS. That means essay. And what it is, they were just flagged throughout the process. We have different attributes that we can put on a candidate as we read. They come up on the reader screen with the comments. ESS means they were essays that really grabbed our attention. It's not necessarily a priority or makes a big difference in some ways, but it tells you that we do look at these very carefully. We'll have a couple hundred every year that we'll tag with the ESS. One of the things we also do then, of the students who end up coming, anybody who has their essay tagged actually gets read and reviewed by our orientation staff, because we have a program called Voices of the Class as part of your introduction to Middlebury. There'll be similar ones at any school you might consider or end up going to, where we actually have our students act out part of those essays. They're really kind of fun, interesting, revealing, kind of funky ones that just grab our attention. So we do look at them closely. I'm going to share with you and then I'll see what you think about some of these essays overall. So we've got to get through a lot of essays, and that is not meant to discourage you. What that's meant to do is help you frame how you want to go about the essay. It has a very, very specific purpose. What do you suppose that is? We just talked about it. It's to help distinguish you from a lot of other very, very strong candidates who are also here at Taft, or at Joel Barlow, or at Loomis, or Westminster, or Conard, or Hall High School. Okay, lots and lots of students applying. You want to put your best foot forward. But my point is that keep in mind that over 15 minutes or so, and a couple of minutes we'll have to look specifically at the essay, that should inform how you go about how you choose to approach your essay, I think. One of the interesting things about the essay is everything else is fairly formulaic. We get into a rhythm, we look at the reader screen, we check out some things, we see your transcript. Now that you guys have
100-point scale?
Yeah, a point scale that's, I'm just joking, you guys used to, is this generation out?
This class will be the first class with all 100-point grades on their transcript.
And used to be, was it 11?
6.0. 6.
All right, it was a 6-point scale. So you look at that, you read that, you anticipate those things. I will say, to give credence to some of the essay, that it is something that will be different for every one of you. It is the one thing you have complete control over in the process, and so ought to be a real reflection of you because of that. I think that one basic question we think about in reading through them is a fairly simple one. In reading the essay is, would you like to have this person for a roommate? I think that's another way to think about it. If you read the essay, and if this is someone you might like to have a roommate, as a roommate, you're on your way to a good essay as we look through that. That could be because it's insightful, revealing, funny, interesting, all the above. We'll talk about some more specific rules about that in a second. Before we do that, we talked a little bit about the purpose and setting it up and knowing that this is not a thesis, this is not a 20-page paper, it's not an independent research project you're doing next year as a senior here at Taft, nor is it necessarily confessional. It's a college essay, and so let's move into a little bit about that. There are two levels at which it's going to be judged typically. This has been true wherever I've worked. I think the first one is competency. So shout out to me what you think competency might mean. We're looking for a basic level of competency that we expect of everyone, whether you intend to be pre-med or engineering or literature or environmental studies, competency.
Grammar?
Yeah, basic skills. You've gone to Taft, in most cases will have been 4 years. You should be able, anyone should be able to certainly demonstrate a level of competency that has to do with proofreading, with grammar, with spelling. What else? Structure, possibly. Did you answer the question? All right, are you picking one of the Common App questions or the open-ended one? Are you following those directions? Is it within the word length? There's a lot of angst going on about that. I think it's overrated. It's about 500 words, about 2 pages. That's plenty of time to give you that. Should it be a reflection of the fine education you've received here at Taft? Yes, it should. So don't underestimate just a basic level of competency. Cross your T's and dot your I's, have everything in order, use your word check or spelling and tools and all of that. And we would expect that of everyone. The second would be a way to potentially identify skills or talent. Is this person actually an exceptional writer? Are they demonstrating something really interesting and different about themselves? Are they doing it in a way that's captivating, interesting, much more subjective, much more fluid, but still important? Okay. Questions so far on either of those? I brought 50, but each has 4. So why don't we pass out enough so that everybody could probably split these and read 2 of them. So who read the one on the NPR lecture? Anybody read that? Several of you read that. The Laugh. All right. The half Jewish, half Christian girl. All right. And then the ranch hand. All right. So everybody's read at least one of them. Anything in particular strike you about these essays? What I like is that these are all real, live, admitted Middlebury students. They are not Nobel Prize in Literature, award-winning, oh my God, revelation essays. They are not essays that really are a reflection of having had to done something exotic or superhuman, or have gone somewhere, or paid to do something, or tried to gain some advantage to have an edge in the college admissions process. They're fairly down to earth, accessible, real life, in some ways everyday things that they just wrote. And there are many, many more. I just kind of went through and randomly picked these out yesterday, and I like that about them. They are not things that any one of you are not capable of producing. They're glimpses into the lives of some seniors in high school from around, in this case, from around the country this year. They are, I think, genuine and real and kind of straightforward. They don't reflect something that none of you are not capable of achieving as well. Tell me a little bit more about them, your reactions to them. Why would the NPR one appeal to us? Why would it grab attention? What about that strikes you as a pretty solid college essay?
Honesty. Yeah.
Very honest. Okay. Identifying with the whole college process, a reflection of self-evaluation, self-awareness. All 4 of them are very competent. Most of them are pretty good writers. They reveal a lot about these students. Tell me some more about it. You guys ever have lecturers here at Taft? They come to talk to you about it. I think as you approach the next year or so, as you get ready to go into next fall and you're thinking early decision or not, but be on the lookout, if you haven't done so already, for moments, things in your life that come at you and maybe from around the corner indirectly that you feel you could write about, that might present an opportunity for you to reflect on something important to you or something that you would like to talk about. Other essays this year that caught my attention, I read, one was about a guy who saved up money all summer to buy a car, and he finally bought the car before his junior year, or no, senior year. And it turned out to be a lemon. It was a yellow GTO, so it really looked like a lemon too, apparently. But he talked about the disappointment of that experience. Another one was about a young woman who was a clerk at a 7-Eleven or kind of a convenience store. This guy kept bugging her to go out on a date, finally did. It was disastrous, it was funny, but it revealed someone who I think was compassionate and interesting. And I felt the same way about this one. This is a pretty interesting kind of moment in time. He reflected on it. He talked a little bit about himself. And I think he sounds like an interesting guy. How about the Laugh one? humor can be tough to pull off. It's one of the things, when I talk a little bit more about good topics and not so good topics, every topic that I tell you to avoid, I've seen a really great essay written about. There are always exceptions, but the humor one can be a little touchy. What do you deduce from this young person about this essay? What might, in this case, she be like, do you think?
Funny too. Good to hang around with.
Yeah. Someone you probably want to have potentially as a roommate. Someone who is somewhat self-deprecating but still confident. Someone who writes a competent essay, I think overall. Someone who can laugh at herself but not be embarrassed necessarily. It gives good examples of it. You know, the writing that your English teachers or other teachers here at Taft will tell you. Lots of good details. It flows well. It's a good story. Okay, it fits within what we're looking for. It's a glimpse into this life, or a trait of this particular girl that I think highlights her as an individual. So I think that's a nice one. How about the Christmas ham? Anything appealing about that? Anything strike you about that? Any of you disagree? Think these are bad? You can say so. All right, that one's a little bit longer, but what in the end, it is funny, but what is this candidate telling us about herself in this case? Her background, her struggle with her identity, her faith. All right, can anyone relate to any of this in terms of everyday things that you all think about or deal with, or within your own family or identity? Okay, faith, decisions, how you reconcile them, how it relates to other things. Something as simple as the joke about the Christmas ham thing, but then eventually relating to a trip to Israel and kind of a sense of self-discovery. Okay. And then what's the final one? Oh, ranch ham. All right. I just think this guy's a good writer. What's that? Oh, the girl you thought, the ranch hand, you thought was a girl? How come? It's what?
I don't know, using the cow.
Okay. I just happen to know it wasn't, but what's that? Okay, well that's fair. Do you think he's showing off too much? Is this I'm the exotic, you know, I've got a real working guys type job and aren't I interesting and fascinating? Does that strike you that way a little bit?
Yeah, it's like after I helped rescue and bottle feed the sugar to calf.
Well, that brings up a point that I'll get to now that's in the kind of the do and the don't list. That's a fine line as well, but part of what you are doing is trying to distinguish yourself. These are true, and I think you've got to get comfortable with the idea of talking about yourself, and not just listing resumes or bragging, but expanding on achievements or experiences you've had. I think that would be interesting. Anybody else think he was going overboard, maybe bragging a little bit? I guess if he really does speak Spanish, and he talks Spanish with a couple of guys he mentions in there, that's interesting. Anything else? Any other comments? Did you read them, Terry? I don't know if
I did read that one.
Okay. Okay, so there's some essays from this year that we felt went well. So let's go through some basic do's and don'ts that I think over time that I've seen. And I've seen exceptions to all this that I've mentioned before. I would, well, what would you anticipate those would be? What things do you think I might suggest that you steer away from? Service trips? Yeah, they're kind of like the big athletic game. You know, it was the final swim meet of the year, my final wrestling match. It was all on the line. I've seen some really good ones, but yeah, those are. Why would you say that, by the way? a lot of them, and we've become a little cynical sometimes about the meaning and use of those. I realize that, but again, I see some really good ones every year as well too. But I think you're right. If you're trying to avoid that, we see a lot of those. I'm not taking this from a perspective of heterosexual or any other normative things, but boyfriends and girlfriends, I think, are good subjects to avoid. I read an essay from an otherwise really interesting kid from one of the schools you guys play sports with here. I don't know why this stood out other than his entire essay was about going away to boarding school and breaking up with his girlfriend. And it just was too much. It came across as self-absorbed. I think. And so I always recommend avoiding boyfriend, girlfriend, working out your issues in the college essay. I think that's typically good advice. What things do we tell you to do? Going back again what I just talked about, assuming that we do care about these things. We read them and they are important. I usually tell folks to avoid and this is sensitive to a degree, but I see too many students, I think, kind of working out issues and family issues in the essay. Painful subjects on divorce, parents, things like that. And again, if you really feel strongly that that's an appropriate topic, that's fine, but 500 words, about 2 pages, what we're trying to get through is not the time to, we typically don't find those things particularly helpful or revealing. They're crucial, they're important, and they may be so for you, but I think we need to keep in mind what we're trying to get at with a college essay. That's something I typically advise. This is something I feel very strongly about. Don't write your college essay about writing your college essay. Okay? I see a lot of those, and it's hard to pull off, and at the end, well, now I'm done, and I've actually written it, and they're kind of going through the angst of that. That does typically not work real well. I think a essay ought to reveal itself, as I mentioned before, from around the corner. It doesn't have to hit us over the head, but it can be a glimpse into something we might not otherwise know about. Okay? I'm going to go into some other things. Let me see if there's some questions. What kind of questions do you have about the essay right now? What kind of things could I help you with? If it peels off into other parts of admissions, that's okay. Yes?
Should we write about like a defining characteristic? Like if you would call yourself a leader, would you write about an essay about how you see yourself as a leader? Or
Sure. Let me expand on it a little bit. The 9,000 applications we had this year, about 2,400 of those students were CPTs, were captains. Probably 400 to 500 were school presidents. About 450 were LDRs, leaders, something other than that. 300 or so were editors, EDRs. So there are lots of leaders. I think if you're looking and coming out of Taft and you're looking at Amherst, Williams, Bowdoin, Middlebury's, College colleges and Trinities, or if you're looking at the big universities and the Ivies and the Dukes and Stanfords and Georgetowns, I think you can fairly assume that a significant portion of those students are going to have a lot of strong leadership qualities. We're all looking for that, and I think it would be perfectly fine to talk about that, but I think it would be important to do so in a way that is very personal. What would be an example? How might you write about it? I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm just asking. What do you?
I don't know.
Okay. I think the ranch hand kid would probably be a pretty good leader. I think he demonstrated some interesting qualities. He talked about being able to go out in the truck with only a map that had been written with the knife on a piece of wood. I mean, to me, that's as legitimate a kind of an example of leadership as any. What other ways might you demonstrate leadership or talk about that? I think through a story. I think one thing that is really important to think about is replacing the word essay with story. Okay, what's your college story that you're going to write about? So if you were able to demonstrate something that told us a little story, a little vignette about you that had to do with leadership, I think that could be fine. Maybe it would be leadership in an unexpected way. Maybe it would be about a leadership quality that people don't know about. Would be interesting. Other questions? Yes?
I was going to say, in terms of like, you want us to talk about ourselves, like explicitly, like should we tell you directly, like the girl with her laugh, like I think she was trying to say that she's the person who, you know, accepts people who are different because she feels that she's different and she feels that she can be accepted because of her laugh. But she didn't clearly say that.
Yeah.
Rather us tell a story and indirectly tell you about ourselves.
I'm going to back up first of all, and I'm going to excise the way you phrase that, saying you want. All right, and I'm not being glib about it, but I am saying think about this from a way of what you want and not what we want from that. What we want is you to be in a position to feel that you revealed something about yourself. She did it indirectly in a way that just caught our attention, and I think, yeah, she did do that. She didn't have to include everything. She gave us a slice, and that's fine. There's so much other information in there that you don't have to cover everything. Don't worry about missing out on something. One rule of thumb is that you might think about handing your essay to a roommate, a friend, a confidant, maybe a teacher. It could be a parent, but that gets complicated when you get the parents involved. And ask them this question. Ask them, could anyone else potentially have written this? Is there anyone else that you know that could hand this in and would still be legitimate? And if the answer to that question is yes, you're not done. If you really feel like reading for a good friend or somebody an essay they wrote, and ask yourself, could anyone else possibly have written this? And if the answer is no, you're probably onto a pretty good essay. I'm guessing if this girl handed this essay out to some other people, there are very few people who could have said, oh yeah, someone else could have written that as well too. So we see a lot of essays about leadership or personal situations or describing my room or Knowles. All right, but there are some good ones every year because no one else could have possibly written on that. A slightly different take on that. That's your question. What else? Other things? Yes?
Is this like, are these typical lengths for essays?
I chose them in part because I think they are. They are. What strikes you about them? Why do you ask that question?
Well, you said 500 words is typically 2 pages, and these are 1 page.
Yeah, those are, but they're single spaced. So most of the time, 500 words is 2 double-spaced or 1 single-spaced. The one goes over a little bit. You know, part of this is if you're using the Common App, there's a character limit, so that's going to tell you, and that frustrates people, and sometimes they feel like they've got to add more, and you can, but it's not completely necessary.
But would you prefer shorter essays? If we wrote a shorter essay and it gave you more time to reflect on the thing.
Yeah.
Does that
I'm not going to get back into a corner on that. What I would say is I would prefer a good essay, and I would say it does not need to typically be more than 500 words. I think that, and part of the reason I chose several of these as well too is they aren't that long, right? They need to be extraordinarily long. But if you're saying, is there any way to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, there's any advantage to writing even shorter so that you get a little bit more time to absorb it, I would say that that's not a level of detail that we're consciously probably even thinking about. I wouldn't worry about that. I think
subconscious.
What's that? Subconsciously? Yeah, that is the key. Okay. No, that's not going to work. No. So I like the length of these. I think they are examples to give you of an appropriate type length. They're not overly long. They're not incredibly short. They're just right. Other questions?
Question.
Yes.
If you're prejudiced, like say if you have a strong religious or political or sexual voice, would it be dangerous? Like what if you're reading my essay and you're like, no, you're doomed because you're wrong?
Yeah. That's a fair question. So if you have unusually strong feelings about something politically, religiously, What would you guys, I'm going to answer your question. What's your experience been?
Well, I think we
Mr.
sometimes
McNeil,
say
Mr.
be
Giffen?
careful of the religious piece sometimes. Some people are very, very devout in their beliefs, and we respect that, but we also don't always know who the reader is going to be and how it's going to be perceived.
Yeah. That's where I might go back to what is the purpose of the college essay. I mean, if you really want an op-ed opportunity to show your conviction about something, I think what you'd ultimately have to decide is this essay the best use of that for me to tell this admissions committee about that. You know, and this is part of the adult process of applying to college. You have to make a conscious choice to put yourself out there, maybe take some risks, and you're finally the one who will have to decide that. I think if it's somebody with strong views, who's articulate, I think that would be terrific. I think if it is someone that's strident or full of righteous indignation, we're human beings reading these, we would probably not react strongly. But if you were taking a strong position, you know, in terms of, I don't know if you mentioned sexuality or not, or stances on that, or religion, or politics, that's a judgment call on your part. I've seen some of them go well. I think you could probably guess that if it comes across as obnoxious, that it's probably not great, but that I think I've seen some ones go wrong. I mean, I have seen students who otherwise look pretty strong in some ways and come across as someone that you probably, you might welcome into a community in terms of diversity. You know, there was a really interesting, so I'll try and give you a real life example. There was a fellow from a very progressive Quaker school in New England that's an outstanding school that wrote an essay this year, and he was a real quirky student. He applied early decision, he raised chickens, he was a reenactor. You know what that is? A lot of times around wars and things. He was a Civil War reenactor. He was a Civil War reenactor for the South. And I remember reading this going, I can't believe he's writing about this coming from this school, feeling that way. But in combination with everything else, what he told about himself, it was almost a quirkiness that wasn't rooted in, this is what I truly believed. It was, this is one of the opportunities I take in something I'm very passionate about, and we actually admitted him. He was a really interesting person. Now, I'll also tell you, now that I'm going here, I did read an essay 2 years ago from a kid who wrote about being he was a reenactor, he was a Nazi reenactor. And it didn't make or break it, but that was kind of dead in the water from the beginning. That was not something that I think played real well. And I'm not trying to be too judgy, but do you see where I'm coming from? That I think handled well as an overall reflection. You're not going to fool anybody, but I think you can take a more sensitive topic like that and do something with it, sure. Just depends how you pull it off. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. And you know, here's the thing, listen to your counselors here, see what they have to say. They're probably going to give you a sense of doing this over and over every year, how that works. That's a good question. Others? Yes?
Do you quote famous writers or works or whatnot?
Good question. I would at all costs avoid opening it with the Webster's Dictionary defines so-and-so as, you know, whatever. That's a fairly cliche, kind of hackneyed introduction. If any of you have already written your essays and did that, I apologize. I would go back to my rule of thumb about, I would probably avoid it, but I've seen exceptions that do work well. And I think it comes back to how genuine and authentic it is. If you're going to quote Melville and talking and growing grim about the mouth and November in your soul, and that's really important to you because you're from Nantucket and you grew up with, I'm reading a book right now called The Art of Fielding, so I guess Melville's on my mind here. But you could do it and potentially get away with it. The one thing I would say is it's a matter of space and time. If you feel like devoting 500 words, the first 30 are introducing a quotation and a fairly long quotation, it really better have some impact. Are you thinking of anything specifically, or just asking generally?
Well, yes. I have just like a small quote from Henry David Thoreau. I was going to throw at the end of my essay.
Yeah.
But
I'll answer it this way. I see more instances where it doesn't work well than when it does, but I think if it does, that's fine as well too. If you can bring, it's not an English paper, all right? So if you're analyzing that, that's probably not going to work as well. But if that truly has some deep, legitimate, authentic meaning for you, then I think it could work. Other questions? Okay. All right, some other do's and don'ts list that I think that would be helpful. I think the time, this is an old standby. What do your English teachers tell you often? Write about what you know. I think that you could deduce from the 4 essays we read tonight that ranch hand knows about working on a ranch. The girl who's struggling with kind of the Jewish-Christian dichotomy of her existence talks about her bat mitzvah and other Jewish traditions, but also about the Christian ones. She knows that topic intimately. That's a rule of thumb that I think typically works pretty well. I think going over and revising and editing the things that your teachers are hammering you about continues to be important. I think that, in my experience, the essay is one of the last things in terms of procrastination people get around to doing. So I think if you can start on it as early as possible and just craft ideas and get a general sense of it, I think that's important. I'll say it again, don't try to be funny if you're not. Do be funny if you are. That's a judgment call. If you really don't know, ask someone, see if they'll tell you. Boy, we're coming up on 8 o'clock. I've got other things you'd like to talk about or ask me about with the essay. Yes, Paul.
What do you recommend you write about most? I know you kind of said that, but what are some really, really strong essays that have stood out? How artistic should you get?
How artistic should you get?
People write them about in different forms and stuff.
Yeah. I would typically, again, if any of you truly feel this works well for you, fine, but I would probably avoid sonnets and haikus as a college essay. There are other areas that you can reflect on that. Probably doesn't work as well. Just being very direct. Does that answer your question? Song lyrics that you've written, that kind of thing? Yeah. I mean, what do you guys tell them?
Absolutely, I agree completely.
Okay.
You gotta be careful. I had a student one year who,
yeah,
instead of answering the second question, he drew a picture.
Yeah.
And the picture had blood and gore in it, and Yale said, "No, thank you."
Yeah. So, and here's why I would say it as well. At Middlebury, if you are a serious or inspiring artist, you have the opportunity to submit through the website an art portfolio or submission, a videotape, additional writing, audio, music, and that kind of thing. And so there are opportunities to express yourself at most of these places where that's more appropriate. It's probably not as appropriate in the college essay, in all honesty. And right now I'm just kind of giving you kind of a statistical Vegas odds that overall it probably is not as strong a venue to express that, in all honesty.
Greg, I'd like to shift just a little bit, and that to ask you to help our students think about who they should ask to write their teacher's recommendations.
Who to
We're about
ask
to
for
ask
your
them
teacher recommendations? I think the first thing I would say is that most of you will gravitate and have a natural affinity with who that probably ought to be. The one thing I would say, and I mean this sincerely, is don't be afraid to approach someone that not that you've tangled with, but that you maybe have had a growing experience with, or maybe you got the B minus, maybe a grade that wasn't as great. I think too often we're trying to hedge and make everything look perfect, and really honest, thorough essay or recommendations are very helpful to us. So don't be afraid. One of the best recommendations I read this year was it was a student from Colorado, and she was a very artsy, very touchy-feely, interesting, sensitive person, and she asked the football coach to write her an essay. She had him in class, they had grown close, and he couldn't have been more different from her in outlook, but he, from that perspective, wrote something I thought that was very interesting and helpful. We're typically looking for two disparate, ideally, fields. And I think that's covered, that's fairly obvious. So ideally someone in the humanities, history or English, a humanities course, a language, and then someone from perhaps a more quantitative side of the fence, science, math, somewhere along there. Typically should be junior or senior year, not always exclusively. Okay, does that answer your question?
Very well.
Okay.
What about outside letters of recommendation?
Outside letters of recommendation. I have a couple of rules of thumb on that. I tell people all the time, if there's one way to alleviate some of the anxiety coming out of a very competitive grade school like Taft, and you're all geared towards this, is this. We ask for what we need. If we really needed anything else in the application, we would ask for it, but we ask for what we need. So don't get too worried about submitting lots and lots of additional stuff. If you do feel there's someone else that could speak to you, that's fine. Use good discretion and judgment. One or two is fine. The record this past year was a girl who submitted from upstate New York an additional 14 letters of recommendation. We tried not to hold it against her, but it was pretty annoying. And it was unnecessary, and it created a whole different level of probably stress and anxiety on her part that wasn't necessary. But a couple are good. And what I would say is this, it ought to be someone who really knows you in a meaningful way. That can be a coach, that can be an employer, that can be a pastor, any of that. But use good judgment and discretion, try and limit it to one or two. And probably your parents are going to be dealing with this. If you can calm them down, try to. The most overrated thing you can do typically is a grandfather's cousin's nephew who knows someone on the board and can just put in a good word for you. All right? I understand that. If it happens, it's fine, but it typically isn't necessary, and so I wouldn't worry too much about that in terms of outside the traditional 3 guidance counselor, college counselor, and 2 teacher recs. All right? Think about as you approach this summer and this year, trying to have a good experience, enjoying the journey along the way here at Taft. And one of the ways to do that is do what we ask for, but don't worry about going so overboard that it's going to cause you a lot of extra stress or anxiety. 1 or 2 more questions about anything?